Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 7, Forever and Always. In my opinion, this so far has been the best episode of the entire series.
I don't think Superman in uniform even appeared at all. He flew off to someplace, but this was serious drama that had no Superman in it. So that was quite impressive, and I agree with you. I think from a dramatic point of view, this was easily the best dramatic piece of the 3 seasons.
Yeah. In this episode, at the beginning, we see that the chemotherapy is really making Lois sick. The boys can see it. They aren't satisfied with the front that Lois and Clark are putting up, pretending that everything is fine. The boys go to the fortress and ask their Kryptonian grandmother if there is Kryptonian technology that can cure Lois. They talk to her hologram. Their grandmother tells them that she's already had this conversation with Lois and Clark, and it was decided that it was too dangerous to try Kryptonian cures on Lois's human physiology. The boys aren't satisfied with this answer. After going through Lois's things and finding Lois's end-of-life paperwork, the boys confront their parents. This brings up the ethical dilemma of using Kryptonian technology to save Lois, but keeping the cure for cancer to themselves, or if this was Star Trek, a prime directive violation of giving advanced technology to a less advanced world. And let's face it, giving Kryptonian tech to the people of Earth, regardless of how benevolently it was given, could lead to horrible unintended consequences. Lois and Clark made the decision that Lois would fight her cancer using conventional human methods. If it's not enough, she will die. And Lois and Clark also promised the boys to be more open about Lois's symptoms. Lois and Peia were getting their chemo treatments, Peia being on her final treatment, and Lois, she just wouldn't let go of the Mannheim questions. She just kept asking Peia to the point where Peia was so upset that she got up and moved to the other side of the room to get away from Lois, and she told Lois to leave her alone. Meanwhile, Clark went to see Mannheim, and that was a very interesting conversation. Clark confronted Mannheim about the hospital and the human experimentation, and eventually Clark figured out that Mannheim's motivation is to try to save someone Mannheim loves. Mannheim asks Clark how far he would go to save Lois. This was a really good conversation. Mannheim doesn't make a profit off of this hospital, and he tells Clark that he doesn't need to profit from illness. He's saving his people because they're developing cancer at disproportionate rates compared to the general population. Lois apologizes to Peia, and Peia says that she and Lois weren't supposed to become friends. Peia says she's tired of hiding the truth. Mannheim and Clark show up at the hospital. Peia reveals to Lois that Mannheim is her husband, and now that Lois and Clark know Mannheim's motivation, they're having to reevaluate their opinion of Mannheim. This brings up the question again, do the ends justify the means? Lois and Clark don't know that Peia is Earface and that she's killed a bunch of people. I was surprised to learn that Peia actually had her powers before the cancer treatments. I really enjoyed the flashbacks of Mannheim and Peia's past. Chad Coleman and that actress who plays Peia, they were amazing in this episode. As I said, this is the best I've seen, I think, probably in the series. This is what I've been wanting all season. I am so glad we finally got it. John Henry is doing his best to accept that Natalie has a boyfriend. Lana was instrumental in helping him accept this. Mateo seems like a great kid, but just as I feared, Natalie isn't going to get to have a normal teenage boyfriend. It turns out that Mateo is Mannheim and Peia's son, so this is going to be a Romeo and Juliet situation, considering that Mannheim had this universe's John Henry murdered. So that's going to get all sorts of ugly. Sarah is having trouble accepting Chrissy as part of Kyle's life, but Sarah and Chrissy bond by the end of the episode. I thought that was really well done. I like Chrissy's character. Sarah still seems a bit off, but we'll see how that turns out through the rest of the season. Lana sees Sarah and Chrissy having a good time, and she has trouble dealing with it. She admits to Sarah that she isn't as okay with things as she's pretending to be. Lana and Sarah end the episode shooting off a box of fireworks that Kyle had left behind at the house, and they appeared to be having a great time just living in the now. And one of the things that I found entertaining about this episode was the kids went to go see a movie called Dumb Einstein. That just reminded me of the film Young Einstein from 1988. It was a comedy. If you haven't seen it, it is a really dumb movie. Back in 1988, when I got to go to the theater and see it, it was a good time. So I don't know if that was supposed to be a nod to Young Einstein, but I thought that was clever if it was. And if it was, then that's the right way to do member berries. Just maybe one little Easter egg in an episode, that's it. And have it not even be like in your face. If people pick up on it, great. If they don't, they don't. That's in stark contrast to some of the other shows we've been reviewing lately. I won't get into that because we've been over that many times. But yeah, if this indeed was an Easter egg, then I really, really enjoyed that. And that was pretty much the plot of this episode. As I said, the best parts of this episode were really getting to know Mannheim and Peia through their flashbacks. I'm kind of sad that we don't have a show that is more based around them, because Chad Coleman, I liked him as Clyden on The Orville. I thought he was great as Fred Johnson on The Expanse. Again, I mean, he's bringing that same acting ability to Superman and Lois, and I was really glad to finally see him be able to use it, because in previous episodes it just felt like they were underutilizing his abilities, but this time we finally got to see some of them on full display.
It makes me wonder if the earlier episodes this season were rushed out, because a lot of those episodes didn't feel finished to me from a production point of view. The visual effects didn't look finished. It didn't feel like they had enough time to properly edit the live action footage. It just makes me wonder, because these last 3 episodes have been pretty good, each one getting better than the last. Like, they've actually had time to work on these episodes. Because the Chad Coleman Mannheim, he's finally showing depth to his character, and they're allowing him to act. Because in those first few episodes, when they did have Mannheim, it almost felt like Coleman was just kind of phoning in his performance. But the rest of the episodes, some iffy green screening, and they felt rushed. This episode, the cinematography was beautiful. The dialogue was beautiful. I don't know if you noticed, but there was incidental music that they added to this episode that wasn't just a permutation of the theme song, because normally when they have music in the background, it's usually like a play on the theme song. They actually had different music in the background for a lot of these scenes. They were really getting down and dirty with some of this stuff. It answered the question that we had last week when we brought up the insurance and who's paying for this. It turns out, I'm thinking, the cancer center, it's taking huge losses. So I'm guessing that it answers the question Molly had last week. Who's paying for this cancer treatment? I think Mannheim's paying for the cancer treatments. Yeah,
and let's face it, his question to Clark really stands right there. Like, if you were a cancer patient and you either had the choice of going bankrupt, losing your house, just dying because you can't have treatment, or taking money from someone like Mannheim, what would you do? I think that for the vast majority of people, I think the answer is clear. I think there would be really little choice in the matter. You would have to take that money from Mannheim.
And in the episode at the very beginning, when Lois was being shown to be sick from the chemo, they showed her and Clark in the bathroom as she was hunched over a toilet, vomiting repeatedly. For a show like this, that was really breaking some ground there, because they were showing the ugly sides. When Molly mentioned earlier how Lois was getting sick from the treatments, you could have just left it at that, but they actually showed Lois doing something fairly graphic. I mean, they didn't show the vomit coming out, but she would lower herself below the camera frame and you could hear her puking in the toilet. And that really helped when the boys were like, we know mom's been sick, because you have to think they could hear her in the bathroom doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And when they were rifling through the bedroom and they found Lois's will and all that, I guess she left some letters to them for after she dies, and they were confronting their parents, like all of that worked together. And even some of the melodramatic stuff, as I called it last episode, it was starting to come together here where it was working for me. Sarah and Chrissy and how they were trying to figure a way to coexist and actually went to that movie together. That was organic. It felt organic and it was well done. Natalie and Mateo, when they were trying to get by John Henry, we'll see if he was being overly protective, but at the time it seems like he was being overly protective. And Natalie didn't like that part of her father, and John Henry was acknowledging that this is the first time Natalie's dated somebody, so he realizes he might be going a little bit overboard. But that was well done. A lot of what I liked about this episode can't be conveyed in the review, because this episode was about actors performing. And it's been a long time since I've been able to talk about that, because I personally don't think a lot of television is well acted. Some of it might have some good stories, but I don't think there's well acted performances overall. But this episode had a lot of good performances in it. The actress who played Lois did a great job. Finally, the actor who played the older son, Jonathan, he got a little bit to work with here, and he did a pretty darn good job. The cinematography, the music, it's hard to describe in a review just how rich this experience felt. And there was only one superhero-y type moment, and that's when Peia, in the flashback, used her ability to kill competitive crime bosses, I think is who that was. And I'll admit, the effect with her opening her mouth and these sound waves coming out, that didn't look all that great. But that was at the end of the episode. That's my only complaint. And even then, it wasn't horrible. It kind of knocked it down a little bit. But the rest of the episode, except for that, this was a well-made episode of television, which I honestly did not think Hollywood could do. I thought they lost the ability to do something like this without cutting off people's arms or something, like in a Game of Thrones style activity. This was all about family and relationships. The audience here should know I complain about melodrama. There is a difference in my book between melodrama and doing authentic, feeling family and friend conversations. And I don't like the melodrama because it feels forced just to try to get people to feel a certain way. This wasn't any of that. I wish I could go into like a specific scene or a detail to try to explain why I like this episode so much, but it was the entire performances. You have to watch the episode to appreciate it, and that's something I would recommend doing. If somebody's listening to this and they haven't watched this show, it might be good. I think if you go to the CW app, you can watch this episode. I would recommend going to that. This is a good 45, 50-minute episode of television. If you just, the two little supernatural pieces, because even the boys at the beginning, when they went behind their dad's back to go to the fortress to talk to the hologram of their grandmother, that was a really well done scene. You could see the panic starting to appear in the boys' eyes as they were really worried about their mother. And then at the end of the episode, when the two boys were talking to their mother about her dying, that was really well acted. This was a really well done episode. I have nothing but praise to give here, but I can't give you specifics about any particular scene that lifted it above any other. This was just a well-constructed piece of television that hasn't been made for quite a while.
I would agree. As I said, I think this was the best episode of the series. Yeah, I think even people who haven't seen a single episode of this series before, I think they could watch this episode and actually get a lot out of it. It was really that well done.
And the series doesn't use flashbacks all that often. They used a little bit in season 1. So when they were using it here with Mannheim, I kind of rolled my eyes going, oh boy, because I didn't want to end up in a J.J. Lost situation where that 3/4 of that series felt like it was in flashbacks. But these were effective flashbacks. This was giving one sympathy for Mannheim and Peia, and it was well done. The flashbacks actually helped the story, and I was really glad they were in there.
Me too.
So, like I said, I wish I had something I could point to and say, yeah, this was a good thing, this was a good thing. They were all good things here, and the performances, which can't be done in a review, you have to experience them. But the music, the cinematography, the acting, the fact that except for Peia at the end with her sound blast or whatever that ability is, there wasn't any super moments in this as far as superhero. It was just a family in a small town dealing with cancer and the fallout that could happen from that. And they did a really good job with it.
And even the philosophical questions, they were good. This was worthy of, I would say, older Star Trek as far as the ethical dilemmas that were presented about the possible Kryptonian cure for cancer versus the human experimentation that Mannheim was doing. It gives you something to think about with no real clear-cut right or wrong answer.
Yeah, because Mannheim's going down the one direction of, I'm going to take whatever steps I can to fix these people, and if there are cultural side effects, I'm not worried about that. And Clark and Lois are worried about, yeah, if it cures people, and it's iffy if it will, because the hologram at the fortress said, even if this could help Lois, we're not sure her body could take the treatment. But I think that both of the Mannheim and Clark's philosophies of, well, let's just get this fixed and worry about the side effects later. Clark's worried about contaminating humankind because, let's be honest, if that technology got out there, the military would get a hold of it, they would weaponize it, and Clark would feel responsible for creating a new weapon on the planet. Whereas Mannheim, it looks like part of his research is creating side effect people with temporary abilities. And Mannheim doesn't really care about that. He cares about specifically curing his wife. But I really do believe that he wants to cure that community as well. Mannheim, actually, I agree with what Molly said earlier. Just having Mannheim in this Mannheim in his own television series, that could be an interesting show. It could be kind of spun as a hospital meets mafia type show. Depending on how it's done, I would watch that because it might be able to make some social commentary about the United States health care system and just the general society and how we have to struggle to survive in the world right now. So it would be nice if they did do a spinoff like that with no super abilities at all, just mobster meets hospital, and let's see what happens.
That would be very interesting. However, I don't think you'd be able to do that because we already have a show called General Hospital, and all it is full of friggin' rich people. So that's unfortunate. I mean, I'm not going to say that Mannheim paying for everybody's treatment is a cop-out, but I think that's the only way that they can portray something like this, because I don't think that you're allowed to have an open and honest discussion about what it's like for Americans in our current healthcare system, especially when you get very, very sick. I don't think they'd be allowed to tell that story. I don't think they'd be allowed to be honest. I just don't. It wouldn't be allowed. You wouldn't be allowed to say that. So
they had to pull back, if you remember, on our primer video. We talked about the first episode was talking about all the foreclosures and what the economy was happening in these small towns.
Mm-hmm.
I think they had like one episode after that where they continued that thought, and then they just kind of pushed it in the background. I think large network television does not want that message going out there.
Well, especially with this storyline, we haven't been watching the episodes live the past few weeks because, I'll be honest, the pharmaceutical ads during the regular broadcast were horrible to sit through. Just awful. And I don't think that those pharmaceutical companies would be giving money for advertising time if this show was telling the truth about what it's really like to be sick in America. They just wouldn't. So we're never going to get that story told, at least not through conventional means. Just my opinion on that. Anyway, did you have anything else?
As I said, I wish I had a specific scene I could describe, but my recommendation on this episode is the entirety of the drama and the way it was shot. You really have to experience it to know how good this episode was. It stands out from television right now because I haven't seen this type of television in a long time. Not even talking superhero. This episode was just a piece of drama, and it had my attention the whole time.
Yeah. Well, anybody else watch this episode? What were your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.
Take care.